Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering The Curse of Bikini Bottom and Squidward in Clarinetland. If you squint, these two could be Halloween episodes, I feel. I mean, one's about ghosts, and the other one is just eerie, bizarre bullshit. And I mean bullshit in a good way, don't worry. As always, thank you all for watching today, and my apologies for the slight delay in getting this review out. It was necessary though. And now, let's just get right into it. Well now, The Curse of Bikini Bottom is an episode that I hadn't seen for quite some time until I rewatched it for the purposes of reviewing it. And let me tell you, that rewatch was certainly needed because I literally couldn't remember the plot of this episode for the life of me, which is hilarious because I don't even find this to be a particularly forgettable episode, despite barely anyone on the forum talking about it. For whatever reason, I just personally had trouble remembering it. Not now, though. The Curse of Bikini Bottom begins a lot like the Toy Store of Doom does, which is funny because that episode also had a rather foreboding title. But I suppose that this also means that I'm a little nervous watching this since that episode tried its best to bore me half to death during that beginning. Thankfully, The Curse of Bikini Bottom learned from the mistakes of Toy Store of Doom, and so things get moving pretty quickly and I'm not bored to tears. So, because SpongeBob and Patrick are bored, they decide to break into Squidward's garden shed. I like how they keep calling Squidward Old Man Squidward. Like, that's just funny to me, I don't know why. It just is. And then once the best friend duo explore the shed, this episode kinda reminds me of Reef Blower, or perhaps Squidville, with the way that the two have fun with a lawn tool. Squidward's morbid thought about the two playing with the lawnmower is pretty funny as well, and I love how in a way Squidward was right, because this did end with their deaths, just not in the way that he expected. I also kind of love how this episode just completely throws out everything we know about the Flying Dutchman other than the Davy Jones locker thing by having him live underneath his grave in the ground instead of on his iconic ship. Like, this is literally only done to make the episode plot work, and I can admire this commitment to having no real continuity. And also, I suppose that I'll just take this time to say that, yay, I'm happy that the Flying Dutchman is in this episode because I love him and he always improves things when he's around. Now, in this episode, he plays more of a minor role than you'd expect, but I'm alright with that because this episode is about SpongeBob and Patrick being ghosts, and if he had more of a constant presence here, I could see this episode being called a ripoff of Shanghai, and I'd rather not hear such nonsense. I also love how this episode, in its morbid way, kind of just glosses over the fact that the Flying Dutchman low-key kills SpongeBob and Patrick. Instead, the episode just says that he ghostifies them. The way that SpongeBob and Patrick are completely overjoyed at this prospect, to the Dutchman's dismay, is also pretty funny and very much in character, especially during this post-movie, pre-sequel era of the show, where SpongeBob and Patrick could not give less of a fuck about anything, even if they tried. And you know what? They're so real for that. Anyway, SpongeBob and Patrick try to have some fun as ghosts, and with the way that Squidward reacts to SpongeBob and Patrick trying to haunt him, I like to think that this episode takes place after pranks a lot, so he doesn't believe them because of that. Also, he's seen a lot weirder stuff than that. Another thing I like here is how this episode plays a lot with ghostly appearances and abilities, such as SpongeBob's inconsistent tangibility, or Patrick's example of how translucentness doesn't exactly work in Ghost's favor, being able to see through his eyelids and all. I think that this element made the episode a lot more enjoyable and creative, and we got some good jokes out of it. Like, the haunted way Bill Fagerbaki delivers "my eyelids" is great. Also, the way that SpongeBob just breaks his spatula so that he can have a ghostly one is really funny to me in light of an episode like All That Glitters. Something, the show is inconsistent, and I find that really hilarious sometimes. Once SpongeBob and Patrick go crying back to the Flying Dutchman, I love the cutaway gag with Squidward where SpongeBob's like, "How could everyone live like this?" That was, great and reminded me a lot of the joke from Just One Bite. The way the Curse of Bikini Bottom kind of defies expectations by having SpongeBob and Patrick realize the peril of their situation somewhat early on was a good idea, I think. It keeps this episode from being completely predictable and adds a few more elements of humor by having these scenes that are outside the typical structure of a plot like this. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to make things up to the Flying Dutchman by giving him a makeover so that he can go on his date with confidence, and it works. I like that this episode basically ends on an epilogue, since I love when episodes have those. Also, it literally mirrors the beginning of the episode, which is neat, and I like how this part basically implies that SpongeBob, Patrick, and the Dutchman are friends now, just like Ghost Host, and the ending gag of the episode was pretty funny too, and quite unexpected. The Curse of Bikini Bottom was a really good and funny episode. I'd say that it's a really underrated one too, as well as being very understated in its comedy. The interesting premise of SpongeBob and Patrick turning into ghosts was executed well, although it could have been played with even more. But I mean, I just love when episodes really delve into neat ideas, and perhaps this is one of those times where it was better to play it more on the safe side. This episode was also one of those episodes that used other main characters effectively, even when they weren't the focus, and I'm talking about Squidward and Mr. Krabs here. I feel like this is not something that has been happening as much lately, but that's really just a vibe I'm getting rather than a specific memory. So, anyway, all of this is why this episode is being put in my great tier, where it comes in with a score of 8.7 out of 10. Squidward and Clarinetland is an episode that I've been pretty excited to review, and I'm sure that for anyone who has been following these reviews for any time at all, it's obvious as to why this is. If not, let me tell you, it's weird. This episode is weird, and I love weird. I mean, I loved Spongehenge. Well, I loved its atmosphere. I loved Gone, except for its ending, of course. I loved Squid's Visit, I loved SB129, and I loved Pineapple Fever, which had some elements of weird too. So obviously, I was going to love the weirdness that Squidward and Clarinetland had to offer. That was basically a given. The question is, does the rest of the episode fare so nicely? Well, things certainly get off to a good start as we start with the track Honolulu March, which is a track that I love that also gives me those Help Wanted vibes. Additionally, Squidward and Clarinetland properly begins with Squidward being uncharacteristically happy and unfazed by his job and life, which is a very similar start as Cephalopod Lodge, and so just like in that episode, I'm pretty interested as to why he's so happy. As Squidward walks into the Krusty Krab and his uncharacteristic behavior continues, we get a short break from that in the form of Mr. Krabs scratching his claws on a chalkboard that we've never seen before. Clearly, the sound designers have learned from season 6 because the sound isn't really annoying, thank God, even though it is excruciating in universe. I love how this episode kind of calls to mind Born Again Krabs, as Squidward maintains his chipper mood even in the face of all of these very annoying things happening to him. At least that is until he can keep up the charade no longer. A baby drools on his clarinet and he loses it. I love that this episode continues a series-long running gag with Mr. Krabs being disgusted by actual workplace policies. Like, it's just so funny to me, and so his reaction to Squidward's demand for a locker is amusing. When Mr. Krabs brings out said locker and we get that morbid line about him having forgotten about that prank as there is a literal skeleton in the locker, I'm taking away two very important points from this. Mr. Krabs has killed a man through negligence, as in he forgot the guy was locked inside the locker and so that guy starved to death or potentially suffocated, and also this moment is kind of foreshadowing in a way considering that will happen to Squidward later in this episode. So that's pretty neat. Now, I don't think it's meant to be foreshadowing, but I'm taking it to be that way. I also love all of the throwaway lines in this episode showing how Mr. Krabs so suspiciously or horribly runs his business. First he's on the phone getting rude with his mom, then SpongeBob says that they share hairnets which ew. Honestly, Mr. Krabs is hilarious in this episode, like with that scene a little later in the episode when someone drops money on the floor and he goes ballistic. From here, Squidward and Clarinetland starts getting capital W weird, and I love it. And I like that this weirdness starts off slow. It starts with SpongeBob merely putting velvet lining inside the locker, which is odd, but not out of character for him. And then he walks in the kitchen with a bunch of construction equipment, which leads us to question what it is he's planning. And then we get the reveal that SpongeBob has somehow constructed a whole enormous index system inside the locker, which already looks unnerving with its dark hallways and endless-looking filing cabinets. Never mind the fact that obviously none of this should fit in the locker. Clearly, SpongeBob has attended the Doctor Who School of Dimensional Engineering. Of course, this isn't the end of the weirdness and the utterly bizarre. Squidward returns to work only to hear increasingly concerning construction sounds, and when he goes to check on what the hell is happening, he finds that the inside of the locker is now even larger than before, and this sends Squidward on a wild goose chase that feels a lot like my anxiety dreams. The music cues in this scene, coming from Descent into Madness Part 1 and 2, really sell the weird, eerie feeling, and then Squidward starts chasing SpongeBob, whose only dialogue throughout this section of the episode is his laughing. Honestly, this episode almost feels like a very kid-friendly, watered-down version of a creepypasta. All we need is a reveal that the place that Squidward is in is purgatory, and then we'd be set. I love how when Squidward finds Clarinetland, or the Horned Forest, I suppose, his work hat disappears. I'm taking this as foreshadowing that he's simply dreaming slash having a mental breakdown. Also, the background art for Clarinetland is gorgeous. I feel like I haven't pointed out a gorgeous background in a while, so I'm glad for this. This is the part of the episode where things truly get weird, as there's just a giant bald eagle head that ends up telling Squidward that he isn't worthy to play his clarinet, and then he eats Squidward, I guess, which throws Squidward into a bunch of weird and random chaos, like the scene with the mirrors. Literally, what the hell was that? We also get a surprise Patrick appearance with the pinball scene, which was similarly weird, especially once Patrick just starts saying some nonsense about the pressure, and then a vacuum appears out of nowhere, and I'm choosing to see this as a reference to House Fancy, even though it probably is not. When Squidward finally gets a hold of SpongeBob in outer space, we get the reveal that Squidward was merely dreaming, or perhaps experiencing psychosis from toxic fumes inside the locker. Who knows? Anyway, the point is, the velvet-lined locker opens with Squidward sitting inside of it before he melts onto the floor. And I like how we get literally no explanation for what happened to Squidward in this episode. Like, when did the dream begin? It had to be after SpongeBob lined the locker in velvet, but like, when exactly? Squidward shoves SpongeBob inside the locker, which is kind of undeserved given that Squidward was dreaming everything, but it's funny, so it's fine. And then the ending of this episode is great, with SpongeBob just randomly being in the case so he could bring Squidward his clarinet, and Squidward just running out of the audition that he'd been so looking forward to in horror. You know, someone on the SpongeBob wiki was talking about how the dream Squidward had was symbolizing his anxiety over the audition, and I kind of really like that, especially given what I already said about how it kind of resembles my own anxiety dreams. So I'll be adopting this interpretation of the events in this episode. Squidward in Clarinetland is a very fun, very bizarre, and very unexplained episode. And you know what? That's fine with me. I don't need an answer for every single thing that happens in this show. I do think that Squidward was just dreaming, though, but any further explanation than that, and I've got nothing. This episode is also just really funny, and it really shines with utilizing that kind of throwaway line-based comedy. Yeah, that's what I'm calling that. So, all of this is why this episode makes for a great addition to my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.2 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. I think these two episodes are pretty underrated, as most great episodes of these seasons, as in seasons 6, 7, and 8, are. But also, I think Squidward in Clarinetland suffers from a similar fate as Spongehenge, where people tend to dislike things they don't really get, which can be fair. I mean, I put Spongehenge in my okay tier, but not because of not getting it, but because in its quest to be bizarre and unsettling, it forgot it needed to be entertaining and funny. Squidward in Clarinetland did not have that issue, which I suppose could be a showcase of 2 seasons of improvement, perhaps? I think I need to start adding The Curse of Bikini Bottom to my Halloween marathon. I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but it's been a while, but basically, every Halloween I like to watch a bunch of SpongeBob Halloween-themed episodes, or episodes that I decide are Halloween-themed anyway. So yeah, all of the specials and Halloween episodes are there, but so are episodes like Rock Bottom or Planet of the Jellyfish. So I should add The Curse of Bikini Bottom to that list. It would be fun. And I think that's just about all of the closing thoughts that I can muster up for y'all today, so I think I'll go ahead and close things out here, and I'll see you all in the next review.